What if I told you that the majestic stone castles we admire in movies were actually ice traps for their inhabitants? Imagine living in a huge refrigerator where the walls do not protect you from the cold, but, on the contrary, accumulate it for centuries, turning the air inside into a frozen substance. We are used to seeing romanticized images of knights and kings, but the reality of their lives consisted of a constant, exhausting struggle for every degree of warmth. In those days, the cold was not just a weather phenomenon, but a constant companion that penetrated clothing, beds, and even people's thoughts. People of that era were forced to invent complex thermoregulation systems using only primitive materials and the laws of physics, which they understood intuitively. Every stone in the wall, every fold of fabric, and every armful of straw had a specific purpose in this battle with nature. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn the true price of warmth in the icy halls of stone giants, expressed in the colossal labor and ingenuity of medieval engineers. What if everything you believed in was not true, and the thick walls of the fortress did not protect you from the cold at all? Stone has a unique and insidious property called thermal inertia, and it was this property that became a curse for the inhabitants of the castle. In the summer, the massive blocks slowly absorbed the heat of the sun's rays, but this reserve was only enough for the first weeks of autumn. As soon as the real cold set in, the walls began to act as a giant cold accumulator, drawing heat from everything inside the rooms. The inhabitants of the castles found themselves hostages to architecture that was designed to protect against arrows and siege engines, but was completely helpless against the cold. Touching an interior wall in winter could cause a burning sensation, so icy was its surface. In such conditions, the air inside quickly became damp and musty, creating the perfect environment for a piercing chill. Moisture condensed on the cold stones, dripping down in thin streams and forming puddles on the floor. People's breath instantly turned into steam, which hung in the rooms like a thick fog, not dissipating for hours. The interior rooms often resembled caves, where the temperature was practically the same as outside. The only salvation was to create a room within a room, but we will talk about that later. It is interesting to note that the cold in the castle felt completely different from the cold in the open air. Outside, the wind could be gusty, but inside there was a so-called standing cold that pressed in from all sides. It penetrated to the bone even when a person sat completely still, wrapped in several layers of wool. This feeling of deep freezing was a constant companion during the winter months, from which it was impossible to escape. Psychologically, this was extremely difficult to bear, as the house did not provide a feeling of warmth and security. In order to minimize heat loss in some way, builders tried to reduce the number of external openings in living areas. Windows were made as narrow loopholes that let in a minimum of light, but also limited the influx of icy air. Inside such rooms, there was always semi-darkness, which intensified the feeling of cold and isolation from the outside world. The light from torches and candles only illuminated certain areas of the space, leaving the corners in deep shadow. People got used to navigating in the twilight, saving precious heat and fuel. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that the stone floor was also a source of cold, drawing heat through the soles of shoes. Walking around the castle barefoot or in thin shoes was a sure way to get hypothermia in a matter of minutes. The inhabitants of castles were forced to wear shoes even inside their bedrooms, never taking them off until they went to sleep. This formed a special culture of everyday life, where the boundary between outdoor and indoor clothing was practically blurred. Wearing warm shoes all the time was the only way to keep your feet healthy. Heating such huge spaces required a colossal amount of firewood, which had to be harvested and stored in a dry place. The logistics of delivering fuel to the upper floors of the towers was a real nightmare for the castle's servants and workers. Every day, hundreds of kilograms of wood were carried up narrow spiral staircases to maintain at least a minimum temperature. If the supply of firewood was interrupted due to siege or bad weather, the castle instantly turned into an icy crypt. Dependence on fuel was a critical vulnerability for any fortress in winter. Not to mention the drafts that roamed the long corridors and galleries as if they owned the place. People saved themselves by covering doorways with heavy skins or cloth, trying to create a barrier to the air currents. Fighting drafts was a daily routine, no less important than cooking. In this stone trap, survival depended not on the strength of weapons, but on the ability to preserve and accumulate crumbs of heat. Experience was passed down from generation to generation, acquiring new tricks and inventions. Castle dwellers learned to use any means available to make their lives a little more bearable. They observed the movement of air, the properties of materials, and the behavior of fire. We would love to hear your opinion. What do you think about living in such harsh conditions? Could you survive a winter in a stone tower? Write about it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes. I will reveal the best-kept secret of medieval interiors. Tapestries were not just for beauty. We are used to perceiving huge wall carpets as a sign of the wealth and aesthetic taste of the castle owner, but their main function was purely utilitarian. Tapestries served as a powerful layer of insulation that blocked the icy breath of stone from the living space of the room. Without these thick woolen canvases, it would have been unbearable to be in the staterooms, even with a fireplace. They covered the walls from the ceiling to the floor, creating a continuous cocoon. The secret to the effectiveness of tapestries lay not only in the thickness of the material, but also in the way they were attached. They were never hung close to the wall, but were always attached to special wooden frames with an indentation of several centimeters. This air gap between the cold, damp stone and the fabric acted as an additional insulator, trapping a layer of still air. The fabric itself for such insulation was made of thick wool, which has excellent thermal insulation properties. Wool fibers trap air and do not conduct heat well, making them an ideal material for combating the cold. The weave was very dense and heavy, which prevented drafts from blowing through the tapestry along the walls. The weight of one such tapestry could reach tens of kilograms, and it took several people to install it.
What of the northern?
It was a real fabric wall, reliable and functional. Visually, tapestries also played an important role in creating a feeling of warmth and comfort. The bright colors and scenes depicted on the fabric psychologically warmed the inhabitants, contrasting with the gray and dreary stone. The production of such functional decorations was an extremely laborious and expensive process. Dozens of craftsmen could work on one large tapestry for several months or even years. This explains why tapestries were so expensive and valued on a par with gold and precious stones. In less affluent rooms and simpler houses, simpler materials were used instead of luxurious tapestries. Walls could be hung with coarse cloth, felt, or even woven reed mats. Interestingly, tapestries often concealed small doors and secret passages, which also helped to combat drafts. The fabric covered the gaps in the doorways, preventing cold air from entering from the corridors. Upon entering the room, a person would pull back a heavy curtain, which would immediately fall back into place, restoring the seal. Over time, the use of fabrics in interior design has evolved, becoming increasingly complex and sophisticated. Multi-layered draperies, combinations of different materials, and linen or cotton linings appeared. Caring for such insulation required special effort and regularity. The fabrics accumulated dust and soot from the torches, so they had to be cleaned and beaten periodically. Moisture from the walls could lead to mold on the back of the tapestry, which required airing and drying. Servants carefully monitored the condition of the fabrics, as the comfort of their masters depended on their preservation. How did people cope with the fact that the cold came not only from the walls, but also from below, from the icy ground? In the next chapter, you will learn what unexpected natural material was used to create the warm floor of the Middle Ages. Want to learn a secret that will change your life, or at least your perception of medieval hygiene and comfort? The floor in a castle was the coldest surface, as stone slabs were often laid directly on the ground or basement vaults. To keep warm, people created a multi-layered covering of plants that worked like modern insulation. The basis of this living carpet was most often reeds or rushes, which grew in abundance on the banks of rivers and in ditches around the castle. These plants have a hollow tubular structure, which makes them an excellent heat insulator thanks to the air inside the stems. Fragrant herbs and flowers such as lavender, mint, meadowsweet, or chamomile were often scattered on top of the base layer of reeds. This was done not only to aromatize the room, but also to create an additional, softer layer. When walked on, the herbs released essential oils, filling the room with a pleasant smell that overpowered the dampness and smoke. In winter, bundles dried since summer were used, which were harvested in huge quantities. The smell of dry meadow herbs was the aroma of a medieval home. In rich chambers, woven carpets or animal skins could be spread over the plant layer. Replacing this plant covering was a laborious process called relaying the floors. Old, matted, and dirty reeds were taken out of the castle and burned or used as fertilizer. Fresh armfuls were brought in to replace them and carefully distributed throughout the room. In areas where the risk of fire was high, such as near the hearth, the plant flooring was removed or replaced with something non-flammable. However, in bedrooms and living rooms, reeds covered the entire space from wall to wall. This created a single warm field, eliminating cold spots and drafts across the floor. People literally walked on insulation that protected them from the frozen ground. An interesting feature of such floors was their ability to absorb the sound of footsteps. In a stone castle, any sound was amplified many times over by echoes, but a thick layer of straw and grass dampened the noise, making the environment quieter and more peaceful. In winter, the layer of reeds was made especially thick, sometimes reaching ankle height. This allowed the feet to sink into soft warmth, creating the effect of felt slippers. This simple but effective technology made it possible to survive the harshest frosts when the stone floor became icy. Without this plant barrier, life in the castle would have been fraught with constant colds and foot diseases. Some types of herbs added to the flooring also had antiseptic properties. Wormwood and tansy, for example, repelled pests, which was important in conditions of dense organic bedding. People empirically selected the most effective and pleasant herbal mixtures. It was a whole science of how to make the floor safe, warm, and fragrant. The use of plant materials for floor insulation was a widespread practice, accessible to both kings and commoners. The only difference was in the quality and freshness of the herbs used, as well as the presence of expensive carpets on top of them. If you like this description of medieval life, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. What I am about to show you is banned in 12 countries in the modern world for safety reasons, but in the Middle Ages it was the norm. When there was not enough space for a stationary hearth, or there was none at all in the room, people used portable heat sources, braziers. These were metal bowls on legs filled with smoldering coals which could be placed anywhere in the room. Brazier provided intense heat and allowed you to create a local zone of warmth where it was needed at the moment. The main advantage of the brazier was its mobility. Servants could bring it into the bedroom before bedtime, place it next to the desk, or put it at the feet during a meal. This allowed for flexible temperature control without heating the entire huge volume of air in the hall. People literally carried fire with them, surrounding themselves with a warm cocoon. Braziers were made of iron, copper, or bronze, and were often richly decorated. However, the use of braziers carried a deadly danger that was not always recognized. Smoldering coals emitted carbon monoxide, which is colorless and odorless, but kills silently. To minimize the risk, special aromatic substances were added to the braziers, or high-quality charcoal was used, which produced less smoke. Rooms had to be ventilated, which in turn let in the cold, creating a vicious circle of fighting for warmth and fresh air. In addition to large floor braziers, there were also miniature versions for individual heating. Metal balls or boxes with hot coals inside, known as hand warmers, could be carried in the wide sleeves of clothing or held on the knees. Priests used them during long services in icy cathedrals to keep their fingers flexible. These were true medieval survival gadgets. Another common device was ceramic or metal vessels filled with hot water or heated sand. They were placed in bed long before bedtime to warm up the icy sheets and duvet. Servants would run a special closed pan with a long handle filled with coals over the bed, like an iron. Getting into a warm bed was one of the few real pleasures of a winter evening. Special benches with holes were used for the feet, under which a small brazier with coals was placed. Warm air rose, warming the feet and penetrating under the long hems of clothing. Such devices were especially popular with women who spent a lot of time doing needlework. It was almost impossible to sit still without such heating. Hot bricks and stones heated in the main hearth were wrapped in cloth and used as local heaters. They were applied to the feet, lower back, or simply held in the hands. The stone gave off the accumulated heat for a long time, working like a battery. It was the simplest and most affordable way to keep warm, requiring no complex equipment. The danger of fire from open coals was a constant threat, so braziers were never left unattended at night. Special servants monitored the fire, adding coal or removing ashes in a timely manner. An overturned brazier could instantly ignite dry reeds on the floor, turning the room into a fire trap. The fear of fire was no less than the fear of cold. Despite all the risks, portable fire remained the main method of individual heating for centuries. The technology for manufacturing braziers was improved, making them safer and more efficient. Craftsmen learned to make lids with holes that regulated the airflow and the intensity of combustion. This allowed them to save precious coal. The ability to handle a brazier was an important domestic skill for every castle resident. People knew how to properly stoke the coals, how to avoid getting burned, and how to get the most heat. Do you know how castles created entire rooms inside rooms to preserve this precious heat? The answer awaits you in the next chapter. Sleeping in a huge, freezing bedroom would have been impossible without a special invention: the four-poster bed. It was not just a piece of luxurious furniture, but a real architectural structure that created an enclosed space. Thick curtains closing on all sides around the bed cut off a large volume of cold air, creating a microclimate. Inside such a fabric cube, the temperature rose due to the heat of human bodies. The bed's design included a solid wooden frame that supported a heavy canopy and side curtains. The fabric for the canopy was chosen to be as thick as possible: velvet, wool, or brocade, often lined. The upper part, or sky, of the bed prevented cold air from descending from above and protected against possible debris from the ceiling. It was a real survival capsule. Before going to sleep, the curtains were drawn tightly, and the occupants of the bed found themselves in a small, cozy world. Often, several people slept in one bed: spouses, children, and sometimes servants at the foot of the bed, which further increased the temperature inside. Collective warmth was an effective way to combat the nighttime cold. The space inside the canopy heated up quickly and retained heat until morning. In addition to beds, other architectural tricks were used to conserve heat, such as window niches with benches. These niches were often equipped with wooden shutters that could be closed off from the rest of the room. Sitting in such a niche, a person was in a confined space that was easier to heat. Fabric or fur-covered seats made staying there more comfortable. High-backed chairs and benches were also popular, as they protected the sitter from drafts from behind. Furniture was arranged to create sheltered corners where the air was more still. Screens and portable partitions were often used to divide the space into zones. This made it possible to reduce the size of the heated area. Some castles had special small offices or dressing rooms adjacent to the bedrooms. These small rooms warmed up much faster and served as a place to change clothes or wash. The transition from a warm bed to an icy hall was a real challenge, so such buffer zones were necessary. People tried to spend time in the smallest rooms available. The clothes themselves, stored in chests, also served as a kind of insulation for the furniture. Wooden chests filled with woolen items were placed along the walls, creating an additional barrier. All interior items served one purpose: to preserve heat. The density of furniture in living areas was much higher than we are used to seeing in museums. The organization of space in the castle was subject to seasonality. In winter, life was concentrated in a few of the warmest rooms. Large ceremonial halls could be closed and unused for months. The castle owner's family actually migrated to winter apartments, which were smaller in size and better insulated. This was a sensible way to save resources. Even meals could be moved from the huge hall to more cozy rooms. Tables were set up right in the bedroom or in the antechamber, closer to the fire and away from drafts. Privacy gave way to the need to keep warm. The boundaries between functional areas were blurred in winter. Thus, the room within a room was a universal principle of survival in large stone buildings. Whether it was a bed with a canopy or a corner by the hearth enclosed by a screen, people always sought to reduce the space around them. A small volume of air is easier to heat and keep warm. I discovered this by accident while studying ancient clothing designs. Medieval costumes were complex engineering systems. People of that time were a multi-layered structure that worked on the principle of a thermos. The bottom layer was always a linen shirt or camisole, which fit snugly against the body. Linen had the ability to wick moisture away from the skin, keeping the body dry, which was critical for retaining heat. Woolen garments were worn over the linen, katas, surcoats, and various tunics. Wool, as we already know, is excellent at trapping air between its fibers, creating a heat-insulating cushion. The more layers of clothing were worn, the more air pockets were formed. Wealthy people could wear 3 or 4 layers of clothing at a time, adjusting the number depending on the temperature. Outerwear was often lined with fur, which was the most effective insulator of the era. Fur was worn with the pile facing inwards or outwards, depending on fashion and purpose, but it was a must-have for winter wardrobes. The skins of various animals were used, from simple sheepskin and rabbit to precious sable and ermine. Fur lining turned any cloak into a windproof fur coat. Particular attention was paid to the head and neck, through which a huge amount of heat is lost. Headwear was almost always worn indoors. Bonnets, caps, or the famous chaperones, hoods with capes. The chaperone covered not only the head but also the shoulders and chest, protecting the most vulnerable areas from drafts. It was considered unwise to remove headwear in a cold castle. The long hems of dresses and cloaks also had a practical purpose. They created a closed dome of warm air around the legs. When a person sat down, they could wrap their legs in the hems of their clothing, like a blanket. Sleeves were often made long and narrow, or conversely, very wide, so that hands could be hidden in them. Clothing was a mobile home that a person wore on themselves. At night, people did not undress completely, as we are accustomed to, but remained in their undergarments and often wore a nightcap. The head had to be kept warm even during sleep, especially considering that the temperature in the room could drop very low by morning. Woolen socks or stockings were also a common attribute of nightwear. Sleeping naked in a medieval castle in winter would have been suicidal. Belts and straps helped to press clothing more tightly against the body, preventing warm air from escaping. Tight lacing of the sleeves and neckline served the same purpose. Every element of the costume was designed to seal the body as tightly as possible. Fashion was dictated by the climate and the need for survival. Fabrics for winter clothing underwent special treatment, fulling, to make them denser and windproof. High-quality cloth was so dense that it could be cut without fraying. Such fabric worked as a windbreak. The clothing was heavy, but this heaviness gave a feeling of reliability. Even the color scheme of clothing was important. Dark colors better absorbed heat from the fire or rare rays of sunlight. People instinctively chose dense, saturated tones for winter outfits. Clothing was an investment in health and life. But clothing only retains heat. And where does it come from in the first place if there is no sun? In the next chapter, you will learn how medieval architects captured every ray of light to turn it into heat. Medieval architects, despite their limited technical capabilities, understood the importance of the solar orientation of buildings. When planning the living quarters of a castle, they tried to place them on the south or southwest side. This allowed them to capture the maximum amount of sunlight on the shortest winter days. Rooms facing north were used as storerooms or kitchens, where the heat from the stoves compensated for the lack of sunlight. A special room called the solar, from the Latin sol meaning sun, was the privilege of the castle owner and his family. It was usually the brightest and warmest room, located on the upper floors, where the most light entered. People spent their days in the solar, doing needlework, reading, and socializing. It was a kind of medieval solarium, a place where you could bask in natural sunlight. The problem was that windows were the main enemies of heat. Precious, warm air escaped through them. Glass was rare in the early Middle Ages and cost a fortune, so most windows were covered with wooden shutters. When the shutters were open to let in light, cold air entered the room. When they were closed, darkness fell. It was a constant dilemma between light and heat. Instead of glass, oiled cloth, parchment, or thin horn plates were often used. These materials allowed dim, diffused light to pass through but served as at least some barrier to the wind. Of course, their thermal insulation properties were minimal, but it was better than an open hole in the wall. Such windows did not allow you to look outside, but they made it clear whether it was day or night. With the advent of affordable glass, the situation began to change. But even then, windows were made small, consisting of many small pieces held together by lead binding. Small panes of glass were stronger and cheaper to produce. The lead lattice itself blocked some of the light, but it allowed for more airtight constructions. Glazed windows were a sign of incredible luxury. Heavy wool curtains and internal shutters were used to provide additional insulation for window openings. At night, windows were barricaded in every way possible to prevent the room from cooling down. Sometimes the openings were filled with straw mats or pillows. The struggle for window tightness was fought every night. The thickness of the walls in the window openings created deep niches, which also helped to buffer the cold air. The air in the niche cooled down, but did not immediately penetrate into the main room. These architectural features were used to maximum effect. People knew that windows were the weakest link in the defense against the cold. Interestingly, the location of the windows also took into account the windrows. On the windward side, there were either no windows at all, or they were tiny loopholes. The main light openings faced the inner courtyard, where the wind was not as strong. The castle protected itself with its shape. Sunlight was valued not only for its warmth, but also for its psychological effect. Winter depression and despondency were frequent companions of castle dwellers immersed in semi-darkness. Every sunny day was perceived as a gift, and people tried to spend it by the window or on the wall, catching the rays. The sun was a source of life and joy. Reflected light was also used. Light-colored, whitewashed window slopes helped direct more light into the room. This slightly increased the brightness and, subjectively, the feeling of warmth. The craftsmen of the past knew how to work with light, turning it into a tool for survival. In conditions of constant cold, the human body required increased nutrition to maintain body temperature. Food in the Middle Ages, especially in winter, was very high in calories and filling. Fatty meat dishes, thick soups, and porridges served as fuel for the human internal furnace. The process of digesting heavy food itself caused the body to release heat. The winter diet consisted mainly of long-lasting foods: salted meat, smoked meats, cheeses, root vegetables, and grains. Fresh vegetables and fruits were practically unavailable in winter, so vitamins were obtained from sauerkraut and berry fruit drinks. Hot liquid foods, soups and stews, were an essential part of the meal. A bowl of hot soup could warm you up better than a warm cloak. Spices played a special role in the warming diet of the nobility. Pepper, ginger, cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg were considered hot in nature according to medieval medicine.
My lord.
They were added to wine, meat, and sauces in huge quantities. It was believed that spicy and hot foods stimulated the blood and warmed the body from within. Mulled wine, or hot wine with spices, was a popular winter drink. Bread was also an important source of energy. Dense, coarse bread made from mixed flour took a long time to digest, providing a feeling of fullness and warmth for a long time. It was often dipped in hot sauces or fat to increase its calorie content. Food did not have to be exquisite, it had to be energy efficient. The diet was also adapted to the cold. People tried to eat hearty and hot meals, especially before going to bed or going outside. Breakfast could include hot ale or broth. Drinking plenty of fluids also helped maintain body temperature. Dehydration in the cold was insidious but dangerous. For ordinary people and servants, the diet was more modest, but the principle remained the same: maximum calories. Beans, lard, cheap cuts of meat, everything was used. Hunger in winter was synonymous with freezing. A well-fed person could endure the cold much more easily than a hungry one. The castle kitchen was one of the warmest places, and many servants tried to find a reason to stay there longer. The heat from the huge hearths, where carcasses were roasted, spread to the neighboring rooms. The smells of cooking were associated with warmth and safety. The kitchen was the heart of the castle in winter. Interestingly, the dishes also helped to keep the food warm. Thick-walled ceramic bowls and wooden plates retained their temperature for a long time. Thus, survival in winter depended as much on the contents of one's plate as on the thickness of the walls. The stomach was a furnace that needed to be constantly fed with wood. Without sufficient food, no castle could withstand the winter.
I tell you.
Before the advent of efficient wall-mounted fireplaces with chimneys, the center of castle life was the Great Hall with an open hearth in the middle. It was a huge room where all the inhabitants gathered, from the lord to the lowest servant. The fire was lit directly on the stone floor or on a special platform in the center of the hall. The smoke rose and escaped through a special opening in the roof called a louver. This central hearth was the heart of social life and the main source of heat. Despite the opening in the roof, the smoke often did not escape completely, but hung under the ceiling or spread throughout the hall. Eyes watered, clothes smelled of smoke, and the walls were covered with soot. But it was an acceptable price to pay for warmth. People lived in constant smoke, considering it a natural companion to winter. The smoke ceiling beams turned black as coal. The Great Hall also served as a common bedroom for many servants and warriors. With the advent of wall-mounted fireplaces, the situation began to change, but not immediately for the better. The first fireplaces were inefficient. Most of the heat escaped into the chimney along with the smoke. An open central hearth provided more radiant heat in all directions. Therefore, the old tradition of gathering around a fire in the center of the hall persisted for a very long time. The fireplace was a symbol of progress, but the hearth was more reliable. The fire in the hearth was kept burning around the clock. An extinguished hearth was a bad omen and a domestic disaster, as it was difficult to rekindle it with cold, damp wood. There was a position of stoker who was responsible for ensuring that the flame never died out. At night, the coals were covered with ash so that they could be rekindled in the morning. The logs for such a hearth were impressive in size. Often, entire tree trunks were burned. This required less effort to chop wood. A huge log could smolder all day, giving off even heat. The flames of the central hearth lit up the hall, creating bizarre shadows and a special mystical atmosphere. On holidays, the hearth became the center of the feast. Meat was roasted on it, and people danced and told stories around it. The fire brought people together, giving them a sense of community in the face of the cold night. The hall was the only place where one could truly warm up and dry one's clothes. Upon entering from the street, one immediately headed for the fire. It was a place of transformation, from a frozen creature back into a human being. Over time, heating became more efficient, with the advent of tiled stoves and complex chimneys. But the memory of the Great Hall with its smoky but lively fire remained in the culture as a symbol of medieval hospitality. Humans are incredibly adaptable creatures, and the inhabitants of the Middle Ages were physically more resilient than we are. Their comfort zone was in a completely different temperature range. What we today consider unbearable cold was normal coolness for them. Constant life in harsh conditions hardened the body from childhood. The lack of a sharp contrast between the street and the home helped the body to tolerate winter more easily. There was no such thing as a person coming in from the cold to 125 degrees. The rooms were perhaps 10 or 12 degrees, and this difference was not shocking. Smooth temperature transitions protected the blood vessels and immunity. The body got used to working in energy-saving mode. Movement was literally life. No one in the castle sat idle, except for the very old or sick. Physical activity helped get the blood flowing. Servants ran errands, knights trained, women did housework. Staticity was a path to freezing. An active lifestyle was a necessity. Psychological attitude also played a role. Cold was perceived as an inevitable fact of life that had to be accepted rather than fought emotionally. Complaining about the weather did not make it any warmer. A stoic attitude to discomfort was part of the medieval mentality. Religion also taught patience and humility of the flesh. Living together and being in close quarters helped to keep people warm, not only physically, but also emotionally. People rarely stayed alone. The constant presence of others, conversations, and shared activities distracted them from the cold. A sense of camaraderie and support was an important factor in survival. Loneliness was colder than ice. Of course, illnesses associated with hypothermia, rheumatism, and arthritis were common, but they were perceived as natural companions of old age. People knew many folk remedies. ointments, rubs, warming compresses. Medicine at that time was largely aimed at combating the effects of the cold. The ability to find small joys in harsh living conditions helped people keep their spirits up. A warm mug in your hands, a soft fur, a ray of sunshine. All of these things were valued much more highly than they are today. The contrast between cold and warmth made moments of comfort especially acute and pleasant. Happiness was measured in degrees of warmth. Adaptation also took place at the genetic level. Generations that grew up in the cold passed on to their descendants the ability to better tolerate low temperatures. Natural selection was cruel, but it shaped strong people. The weak simply did not survive. We, modern people, have lost this ability to regulate our body temperature, having become accustomed to central heating. A look at the history of everyday life shows how pampered we have become. A medieval person in a modern office would probably be sweltering from the heat. Ultimately, the victory over the cold was a victory of spirit over matter. People proved that they could live, create, and love even in stone refrigerators if they had wit, patience, and fire. We have come a long way through the icy corridors of history, from frozen stone walls to cozy alcoves with canopies. Now you know that the romance of medieval castles hid the harsh reality of the daily struggle for survival. It was an era when warmth was worth its weight in gold, and a simple woolen cloak was a marvel of engineering. People used everything, architecture, physics, biology, and psychology to withstand the merciless forces of nature. Which of these ways of keeping warm did you find most surprising or ingenious? Was it the living floor made of herbs or the use of clothing as a thermos? Share your opinion in the comments. I'm very interested to know what impressed you the most. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new journeys into the mysteries of the past. See you in the new videos.